In 1204, men wearing crosses on their chests committed what historian Stephen Runciman called the greatest crime against humanity in all of history. Their victims were not Muslims, not enemies of Christianity, but the greatest Christian city in the world, attacked by fellow Christians who swore to protect their faith. Constantinople, capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, 874 years old, 500,000 people, and according to contemporaries, holding 2/3 of the world's wealth. This city had withstood Arabs, Persians, Bulgars, and Hungarians. Yet it finally fell not to infidels, but to Catholic crusaders from Western Europe who came to save Christendom. 3 days. They were allowed to pillage freely for 3 days. Murder, rape, burning libraries and monasteries, destroying 8 centuries of civilization in 72 hours. Inside Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in Christendom, they placed a prostitute on the patriarch's throne and made her sing obscene songs while they drank communion wine from holy chalices. And after all of this, not a single crusader ever set foot in Jerusalem, the city they had sworn a sacred oath to liberate from Muslim control at the very beginning. This was the Fourth Crusade, a holy war called by the Pope himself, in the name of God, to defend Christianity from the advancing forces of Islam in the Holy Land. A holy war that became a historical atrocity. An army meant to protect fellow Christians turned their swords against their own brothers in faith instead of their enemies. So how did this happen? The answer begins with a debt, a blind old man, and a promise that could never possibly be kept, no matter how sincere the intentions. In 1198, Pope Innocent III ascended to the papal throne and immediately called for a new crusade to recapture the holy city of Jerusalem from Muslim control. His plan was actually quite clever. Instead of attacking the Holy Land directly, the Crusaders would strike Egypt first, the center of Muslim power in the Mediterranean at that time. But to transport 33,500 soldiers across the Mediterranean Sea, they needed ships, and only one city had the capability to build such a massive fleet. Venice, the most powerful merchant republic in the Mediterranean, where money was worshipped as devoutly as any saint, and business opportunity was the true religion of the state. And the ruler of Venice at this time was Enrico Dandolo, one of the most remarkable figures in history, a man who would shape the fate of Constantinople and the entire medieval world. In 1192, Dandolo was elected Doge, the chief magistrate of Venice. At that time, he was already 85 years old, ancient by medieval standards for any position of power, and completely blind. According to the chronicler Geoffrey of Villehardouin, his eyes appeared normal, but he could not see his own hand held directly in front of his face. But what Dandolo lacked in eyesight, he made up for in cunning and ambition. He saw opportunities that no one else could see, and he knew exactly how to seize them ruthlessly. In 1201, Venice signed a contract with the Crusade leaders to build ships for 33,500 men at a price of 85,000 silver marks, 450 transport ships, 50 to 60 warships, provisions for 9 months, the largest fleet assembled in Europe since the days of the ancient Roman Empire itself. Venice had to suspend nearly all commercial activity to focus on building this enormous fleet, and Dandolo made absolutely certain they would be paid every single coin they were owed. He also demanded something more. Venice would not merely be a transport contractor, but a full partner in the crusade, entitled to 50% of all conquests and plunder taken. But by the summer of 1202, when the fleet was ready, a serious problem emerged. A problem that would change the entire course of the Fourth Crusade and medieval history forever. Only 12,000 to 13,000 soldiers arrived in Venice, less than 1/3 of the expected number. Many took other routes, many simply could not afford the expensive journey to Venice. The Crusaders could only pay 51,000 marks, leaving a shortfall of 34,000 marks, an enormous debt they had absolutely no way to repay to the Venetians. Venice had invested everything in this fleet. They could not accept a loss of this magnitude, and Dandolo was not the kind of man who would let money slip through his fingers. He made an offer that would push the crusade permanently off course and change the map of the Mediterranean forever in ways no one could have possibly predicted at the time. "Defer the debt," he said, "and in return help me capture the city of Zara, a city that rebelled against Venice and needed to be punished for its defiance against Venetian authority." There was one small problem. Zara was a Catholic city belonging to the Kingdom of Hungary, a Christian nation, and attacking it meant attacking fellow believers in violation of church law. But with 34,000 marks of debt hanging over their heads, the Crusade leaders had few options. And the blind old man in Venice knew this perfectly well and exploited it. In October of 1202, the fleet departed Venice with approximately 200 ships, one of the largest naval forces Western Europe had ever seen assembled in one place. And standing at the prow of his vermilion-painted galley, beneath a canopy of red silk, was Dandolo, nearly 95 years old, completely blind, yet still leading the entire army. In November, they arrived at Zara, a Catholic city on the Dalmatian coast, and some knights immediately began to protest against attacking their fellow Christians in a holy war. Abbot Guy of Vaux-de-Cernay stood up and declared that the Pope had forbidden attacks on Christian cities, and anyone who participated would face immediate excommunication from the church. Dandolo responded coldly that he would have his revenge on Zara, excommunicated or not, and demanded that the lords keep their word and honour the agreement they had made with Venice. Zara fell after 2 weeks of siege, the city was thoroughly sacked, and its Catholic inhabitants suffered a fate they did not deserve at the hands of fellow Christian soldiers. When news reached Rome, Pope Innocent III responded by excommunicating the entire Crusader army, stripping them of all the spiritual indulgences they had been promised for their holy mission. A crusade excommunicated by the very Pope who called it into existence. The soldiers wearing crosses were now sinners in the eyes of the very church they had sworn to faithfully serve. They camped through the winter at Zara, and it was here, in this freshly sacked city, that a new character appeared and changed everything about the direction of the Fourth Crusade. Alexios Angelos, the young prince of the Eastern Roman Empire, son of the deposed Emperor Isaac II, arrived seeking Western military help to reclaim his rightful throne. His uncle, also named Alexios, had seized the throne from his father, blinded his father with red-hot irons, and thrown both of them into a dark dungeon to rot and be forgotten. The young prince made an offer too attractive to possibly refuse. "Help me reclaim the throne of Constantinople, and I will give you everything you need to complete your holy mission. 200,000 silver marks, 4 times the Crusaders' debt to Venice, 10,000 Byzantine soldiers to join the crusade, and the submission of the Orthodox Church to Rome. Additionally, Alexios promised to personally join the conquest of Jerusalem, bringing the full resources and military might of the Eastern Roman Empire to fight alongside the Western Crusaders. 200,000 marks, an absolutely staggering sum, enough to pay off Venice, equip the entire army, and still have enough left over to bribe half the rulers of the known world. Dandolo agreed almost immediately, and this surprised many people because he knew the internal situation of the Byzantine Empire better than anyone else in the entire Crusader leadership. He had served as Venetian ambassador to Constantinople years earlier, he knew the imperial treasury was empty, and he knew that Alexios's promises were completely impossible to fulfill. But Dandolo agreed anyway. Why? Because whether Alexios could pay or not, Venice would win this gamble either way, and the blind old Doge had calculated every possible outcome in advance. If Alexios paid, Venice would become fabulously wealthy. If he could not pay, Venice would have a legitimate excuse to seize Constantinople, the greatest commercial centre in the entire world. In June of 1203, the fleet arrived at Constantinople, the largest city in Europe, rising from the sea like something from a dream, glittering with gold and ancient monuments. 500,000 inhabitants, 20 kilometers of triple walls, 874 years without ever falling to any enemy. And Alexios promised the gates would open to welcome them. In July of 1203, the siege began, and the Venetians attacked from the sea, where the walls were weakest and where their naval expertise gave them their greatest advantage. Dandolo, nearly 95 years old and completely blind, stood at the prow of his ship holding the banner of St. Mark, personally leading the assault on the Byzantine sea walls. When the Venetians hesitated under heavy fire from the walls above, he shouted that they should put him ashore immediately if they still valued their lives and their honor as Venetians. The Venetians captured a section of the wall, and that very night, Emperor Alexios III fled the city like a coward, abandoning his throne and his people to their uncertain fate. On August 1st, 1203, the young prince was crowned Emperor Alexios IV, ruling alongside his blind father Isaac, who had been released from the dungeon after years of imprisonment. But immediately, problems arose. The treasury was completely empty. The previous emperor had taken everything before fleeing, and there was nothing left to pay the Crusaders as promised. To raise money, Alexios IV ordered church treasures melted down, gold stripped from icons and sacred images, gilded roofs torn from churches, and minted into coins to pay his debts. The people of Constantinople were furious. They already hated the Western Latins, and now they had to endure a puppet emperor installed by foreign soldiers camped outside their ancient walls. In August of 1203, riots erupted throughout the city, and during the chaos, the Crusaders set fire to a large section of Constantinople in what became known as the Great Fire. The fire burned for 3 days, destroyed kilometers of homes and businesses, and left approximately 100,000 people homeless, refugees in their own city because of the Latins. Alexios IV could not pay the full amount he had promised. He begged the Crusaders for more time, and they reluctantly agreed to extend the deadline until April of 1204. But tensions escalated daily. The people wanted the Latins expelled, the Crusaders wanted their money, and the young emperor was trapped in the middle with absolutely no way out of the crisis. On January 25, 1204, Isaac II died, and his death sparked the uprising that had been building for months among the angry population of Constantinople. The people of Constantinople rose up and overthrew Alexios IV, the puppet emperor they despised, and placed a new man on the throne who promised to drive out the foreign invaders. Alexios V Doukas, nicknamed Mortsouphlos, meaning bushy eyebrows, a tough aristocrat who swore he would expel the Crusaders from Byzantine territory or die trying to defend his people. On February 8, 1204, Mortsouphlos ordered Alexios IV strangled to death in his prison cell, ending any hope of peaceful reconciliation between the Crusaders and Byzantines. Mortsouphlos sent a message to the Crusaders. "Leave immediately. There is no money, there is no deal, there is only war if you choose to remain on Byzantine soil any longer." But the Crusaders had no way back. They had come too far, they owed Venice too much, and they could not return to Europe empty-handed after everything they had sacrificed and endured. In March of 1204, Venice and the Crusade leaders signed the Petitio Romaniae, an agreement to divide the entire Byzantine Empire between themselves after they conquered it. On April 9th, they launched their first assault, but it failed. Bad weather and fierce resistance from the elite Varangian Guard pushed back the attack with heavy losses on the Crusader side. On April 12, 1204, a strong north wind pushed the Venetian ships close against the sea walls, and they launched their second assault with everything they had left. Approximately 70 Crusaders crawled through a hole in the wall, fought the guards defending the breach, then managed to open a gate from inside to let their comrades pour into the city. Mortsouphlos watched his army crumble and decided to flee, just as his predecessor, Alexios III, had done before him, leaving the city to whatever fate the conquerors would impose. On April 12, 1204, the walls of Constantinople fell, and 874 years of being unconquered came to a sudden and catastrophic end at Christian hands. 3 days. The Crusade leaders allowed their soldiers to pillage freely for 3 days, and what happened next exceeded anything that words could possibly describe or justify in any way. They stormed into churches, monasteries, and palaces, smashing doors, toppling statues, taking everything they could carry, from gold and silver to sacred relics revered for centuries. They smashed open reliquaries to extract the precious metals inside, poured holy wine on the ground, used sacred chalices as ordinary drinking cups for their wine and their crude celebrations. Inside Hagia Sophia, the greatest religious building in all of Christendom, they placed a prostitute on the patriarch's throne and made her sing vulgar tavern songs to mock the Orthodox faith. They destroyed the ancient bronze statue of Hercules, a masterpiece by Lysippos, the personal sculptor of Alexander the Great, melting it down to mint coins from its irreplaceable metal. They broke open the tombs of Byzantine emperors in the Church of the Holy Apostles, searching for gold and jewels among the bones of men who had died centuries before their arrival. They killed without discrimination, raped women without mercy or exception, including nuns who had dedicated their entire lives to God and taken sacred vows of chastity and devotion. Robert of Clary, a knight who participated in the expedition, wrote that 2/3 of all the wealth in the world was concentrated in Constantinople, and now it all belonged to them. Venice received 150,000 silver marks as agreed, the Crusaders received 50,000, and an estimated 500,000 additional marks were stolen privately by individuals. The 4 ancient bronze horses from the hippodrome, possibly dating back to ancient Greece, were taken down and shipped to Venice as trophies of the greatest plunder in medieval history. They still stand at St. Mark's Basilica today, silent witnesses to what happened 800 years ago, the enduring legacy of one of the largest and most shameful thefts in human history. Niketas Choniates, a Byzantine court official, survived that terrible night and recorded everything he witnessed, preserving the memory of the horror for future generations to understand and judge. He had to abandon his home, leading his family through the smoke-filled streets at night, watching the city he had loved his entire life burn at the hands of men who called themselves servants of Christ. He later wrote O City of Byzantium, a lament for the lost capital, for 874 years of civilization reduced to ashes and rubble in just 3 days of unrestrained violence. Mordzuphlos was captured afterwards, and the Crusaders executed him by throwing him from the top of a tall column, a death reserved for traitors and usurpers in Byzantine tradition. Baldwin of Flanders was crowned Latin emperor inside Hagia Sophia itself, the same church that just days before had been filled with blood and the screams of the dying and the violated. Dandolo was offered the imperial throne by the knights, but he refused. He did not need a crown to have power, he needed something else. Something far more valuable and lasting than any title. He took the title Lord of 3/8 of the Roman Empire, along with control of the most important trade routes across the entire Mediterranean Sea from the Adriatic to the Black Sea. Venice became a maritime empire, controlling key islands and ports from the Adriatic to the Black Sea, laying the foundation for centuries of commercial prosperity built on the ruins of Byzantium. In 1205, Dandolo died in Constantinople, and was buried inside the very church of Hagia Sophia that his soldiers had pillaged, his tomb a permanent monument to the conquest. The Latin Empire of Constantinople lasted 57 years, until 1261, when the Byzantines finally managed to recapture their ancient capital from the Western occupiers. But Constantinople in 1261 had only about 35,000 inhabitants left, a decline of over 90% compared to before the sack, a ghost of its former magnificent self. The Byzantine Empire was restored, but in name only. Real power was gone forever. The economy was shattered beyond recovery, and the empire would never regain its former strength or glory. 249 years later, in 1453, the Ottoman Turks attacked Constantinople for the final time, and this time there would be no recovery, no restoration. They found an exhausted city with only about 50,000 people, crumbling walls that could barely be defended, and an empire that was nothing but a shadow of what it had once been. And here is the greatest irony in all of history. The Crusades were called to defend Christianity from the expansion of Islam and protect the holy sites of the Christian faith. The result was Islam conquering Constantinople, turning Hagia Sophia into a mosque, all because Christianity had destroyed itself with its own hands 400 years before the final Ottoman siege. The schism between Catholic and Orthodox Christianity, which had existed since 1054, became a blood hatred that could never be healed or forgotten by either side of the divided faith. It was not until 2001, 797 years after the sack, that Pope John Paul II finally issued a formal apology to the Orthodox Church for what had happened. "It is tragic," he wrote, "that those who set out to secure free access for Christians to the Holy Land turned against their brothers in the faith, a betrayal that still echoes through the centuries." In 2004, exactly 800 years after the disaster, Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I formally accepted the apology on behalf of the entire Orthodox Christian Church. 800 years. That is how long it took to say 2 words of apology for 3 days of pillage, for thousands of deaths, for an entire civilization destroyed by those who claimed to defend it. 1 crusade. 1 debt of 34,000 marks. 1 blind old man of 95. And 800 years of hatred between people who worship the same God and read the same holy scriptures.